Hello, BookTube, and welcome to my ongoing videos regarding science fiction. And for the month of November, I am devoting these Tuesday videos to New Worlds November. It's a reading event for the whole month, reading short form science fiction, short stories, novellas, novelettes, short novels, 250 pages or under. The 250 pages or under is sort of the guideline. And each week there's a different theme. This week is aliens. So I'm devoting this video to a very brief, and I stress the word brief, history of aliens. And I'm going to gloss over large periods and I'm going to generalize to a large extent for periods and groups of of science fiction stories, because you could literally write books on this. There is so much material. You can go into so much detail if you wanted to. Uh, but we start with most like you can find this in most general descriptions, like the beginnings of this is the second middle of the second century A.D. Lucain wrote. It's considered by some the first novel, and it's called True History, and it's sort of a retelling and a collection of sort of older tales, mythology, but they also travel through space, going to other worlds, and they meet non-human beings. So, hence aliens. It's proto science fiction, if you want to call it, very proto science fiction, or prehistory science fiction. And then there were a few others, like basically up until the 1800s. There were a lot of these fantastical journeys happening, either to the sun, Cyrano de Bergerac, and going to the moon. Lots of this material. Even Godwin wrote the trip to the moon, but in most of these, it's a satire or it's utopian literature, and there's for the most part no aliens, no inhabitants on these worlds, and the worlds are described in sparse terms. Let's say no detailed world building yet. In 1634, though, Johannes Kepler wrote a book called Sunium, Sanuum, I think it is. Probably pronouncing that wrong. And it's about the moon, and he talks about basically it would be the Selenites, or well, what would be called Selenites later, by inhabitants of the moon, and how they augmented the environment. So there's a bit. We're starting to get now a little bit of world building, I guess you would call it. And then into the 1800s, a little more is happening. We've got in the mid 1800s, we've got a lot of French and European writers dealing with these other journeys as well. They're usually magical or mysterious, how they get there. Sometimes a demon will transport them, say for instance, and they're on another another planet or the moon, and there's evil beings, that type of thing. But with De Fontenay's Star, a book from 1850s. It deals with a little bit with alien culture, so we're getting into a little more meaty things with regards to aliens, and also too in the late 1800s we got Rosny, The Shapes, and that talks about again a little more detail about aliens, but still nothing substantial really. And then we've got at the turn of the century we've got H.G. Wells with First Men on the Moon, and here we got the Selenites, sort of a satire to a certain extent, and then later A War of the Worlds, where you get the which was very influential for the adversaries of aliens, and the military might and conquering of humanity, and that runs through alien depictions for a long, long time. Well, it's still there in it, so it was very influential. And he wasn't quite the first. And then we've got, as we get up into the First World War era, uh, early 20th century, we get Edgar Rice Burroughs with for instance, the Barsoom, John Carter going to Mars, and but he makes his aliens sexy. Deja Thoris, she's very human looking and to be attractive to John Carter, but she lays eggs, so she's not human. So we're starting, but it gets to a point where the aliens through the 20s and beginning into the 30s are if they're good aliens, then they're sort of humanoid looking, and if they're evil and bad and warlike and want to conquer, they're based sort of on reptiles and octopus with lots of tentacles and so forth, and that carried right through. And they're sort of like the beings, the bug-eyed monsters of aliens, and that permeated a lot. But occasionally, starting into the late 20s, there was a bit of a change. There was like Edmund Hamilton started writing his interstellar patrol stories, and I'll be reading the Star Stealers 1929. And I was trying to figure out what magazine it was, and I've tracked that down. It's was in Weird Tales. He was quite prolific, and he went on to write for DC, doing Batman and Superman and all this, and he helped develop, I think, one of the Justice Leagues or something like that. I don't know his career really that well into the period, but I don't know it definitely into the comic book era. But anyway, yeah. So we've got that, and it's still like a lot of alien invasion type stories. Doc Smith sort of picks up on this as well, but there's not a lot of depth to the aliens, and they're not described that well. They're either humanoid or non-humanoid, and that's almost where it's left, and it wasn't until the P. Schiller started writing a little more depth with aliens, but it wasn't until two writers that are almost simultaneously done in the mid 30s is Stanley G Weinbaum, his landmark story, the A Martian Odyssey, 1934, and that is the most influential, probably, alien one, because he started describing actually aliens and an environment. He doesn't have too much emotional connection to the aliens yet, but he was the first trying to describe non-humanoid aliens in that were intelligent and not just so much bug-eyed monsters. And Doc Smith picked. Oh no, that's no. Doc Smith continued on a little bit with that, but there was another writer, Raymond G. Gallman, that also was about similar time that were creating this. But Stanley G. Weinbaum was the one that, and this is A Martian Odyssey. You pick up any half decent size, like, I don't mean something that's like 100, 200 pages, but if you pick up an anthology of science fiction that is sort of historical, that covers the beginning, some from the 20s or even before, all the way up to the present, or even any time in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, you will have A Martian Odyssey in there, because it is very, very influential. And later ones he wrote that he just continued on. It's like Lotus Eaters and a whole number of other stories. But he died quite young of cancer. So I'm not sure exactly. Maybe in the 40s, I think it was. Or but yeah, he didn't have a long writing career. Uh, but yeah, and then sort of it developed a little more into the 40s where aliens became a little more with a little more depth, and world building began. um, and I'll bring in Clifford Simak here. His aliens could be all sorts, but a lot of times Clifford Simak's aliens are have human attributes in a sense, and that's the thing. A lot of the early aliens either had um, one attribute that was really prominent, that was a human attribute, and that was them. For instance, even Simak in his city stories, Martians had a forte for philosophy. Not really science so much, but philosophy was their thing. So and just other ones, like other writers did similar things, and they became more sort of sympathetic towards aliens as well during the 40s and into the 50s to a certain extent. Like, for instance, Simak, Ray Bradbury with the Martian Chronicles, is very, very sympathetic towards the Martian race, and very sort of um, um, sad, I guess is a good word to use, of their demise. And then occasionally you will get stories where the humans are the aliens, and that sort of does the twist on it. And that began really sort of maybe late 40s into the 50s, and we just sort of started developing more sort of world building, more details of the world and the biology behind the aliens, and not just bug-eyed monsters. However, the bug-eyed monsters continued and continue to this day, thanks to, or at the detriment of Hollywood, I suppose. The 1950s was full of this stuff. The bug-eyed monsters, and one of the one of the best sort of stories, like, it was in the late 30s, is I'm going to be doing this, the book to film is John W. Campbell's Who Goes There, which was based on the thing. It is a bug-eyed monster, but it's a shape-shifting, well, not quite a shape-shifting monster, but it can mimic other organic life, um, or at least mammalian or even avian life, and it can mimic it and become the same as that, and it's very horrific. And that's but there's a lot more to the story than that, and I'm not going to go into the details of that. I will for my book to film on Saturday. But yeah, so and then in the 50s they made the 1951 film, which was quintessential sort of 50s, in some ways, science fiction. And then another one which was very quintessential 50s is Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That was from I can't remember the author's name, but the Body Snatchers book. Um, and but that was during the era of McCarthyism, and it's very American. All these films are very American centered, for either McCarthyism, the communist threat, um, as well as the scare of nuclear, disaster, atomic radiation, that would create these things, or other species, other aliens, waging war and that type of thing. So that permeated, and it was just sort of it went backwards, science fiction for a film, but there was a lot of it was based on writing as well. So it did then influence the writing. But then we get up into, but then we started getting a few other things like The Lovers by Philip Jose Farmer in the 50s. And that was shocking because it's a human falling in love with an alien that's sort of a, I think if I remember right, insectoid, but can mimic the look of a human. And there's all sorts of things, and the taboos were sort of broken. But the thing was that they were getting more detail about aliens, about their physiology, their mental aspects, and not just being one dimensional or even two dimensional. They become very three dimensional characters, and their environment is very meticulously, or can be meticulously described. And but then we also have sort of like I think it's a bit of a balk against aliens, because you look at some of the big science fiction series, like for instance Foundation. Until he finished it, aliens don't exist in a lot of Isaac Asimov's writing. There are, but in a lot of it, there are no aliens to a greater or lesser extent. And then you look at Dune as well, which is a popular film now. There's it's the world building is there, but not in an alien sense. But there's alien life because you got the worms. So sometimes that is substituted is other alien forms, but not intelligent life. And this is more or less where I'm going to leave. Well, I'll go a little further. Okay, sorry. There was a book that I was reminded while I was looking up some dates and stuff of a book that I would love to have again. It's edited by Harlan Ellison. It's called Medea, Harlan's World, and he got together a lot of writers, Hal Clement. Um, uh, Robert Silverberg, I'm forgetting now who, but a lot of writers, and they wrote a few. It was basically from a conference and a discussion about creating world building, and they wrote a few essays about what is essential for world building, and then they wrote stories, and they're all, I think, if I remember right, based on this one planet, but different takes of how you go about it, and that is excellent. There's even one. Well, there is a story by Harlan Ellison, obviously, of course, but you get all sorts of like the once sort of the science fiction field was done with the in some ways done with the bug-eyed monsters to a certain extent. It evolved, and there's stories of duplicity and betrayal between aliens, like friendship, all sorts of things, like James Triptree. She wrote a lot, at least several stories that were very interesting with with aliens, and then we come up. Well, I can't come up a little earlier because there were some writers that I read that I enjoyed. Larry Niven was one, and he permeates his stuff with with aliens. Sometimes he goes back to an alien invasion type, but he does flesh out these aliens a little more. And then we've got A.E. Van Vogt writing a story in late 30s, early or mid 40s. I think, I can't remember exactly. It just sort of came to mind. And he talked about aliens laying eggs in people. Does that sound familiar? Well, that was sort of used for the 1970 late 70s Ridley Scott film Aliens. So that kind of thing, but it was still sort of the bug-eyed monster type thing, but these are influential things that carried through. So there's all sorts now. There is the bug-eyed monsters still. There's the alien invasion. There is the ugly, aliens that I'm sure are still running through science fiction now, or at least it had up into the 80s. If they were pretty, they were good, and if they were ugly, they were bad. And you go back to the 50s stuff. The humans always found sexy aliens. And from what I see now is there's the alien romance stuff, and Becky Bryant is reading stuff of blue aliens. So that's something that was totally new to me. So it's almost come full circle for this. But yeah, that's just sort of an overview, and a very brief overview, as I say, and just and touching on a few of the sort of themes in Aliens. And yeah, and it's quite fascinating. I think, because it's an interesting thing, and because you get everything. You got, again, like I say, you've got aliens that are very human like. Well, you just look at Star Trek. Most of the aliens there, they just have a little brow ridge or something wrong with their nose, but they're an alien, but they're compatible with humans in every shape and form. And but when it started, like, people were a bit shocked apparently when they thought that Spock was too scary for people to handle, because he was alien. And then we flash forward to my favorite is Babylon 5, where they tried to do non-human aliens, but it's very difficult, and most of the time aliens are sort of extensions of humans in many ways, and I think that's still a problem with depicting aliens. And people have tried to write, like, how do you write something that's totally alien? It would be so alien possibly that we could not understand it. So how do you get that across? And that has been tried. There's been writers that have tried that, to most failing, I think, because it's you also have to write it in an understandable way. But if you write something that's totally alien, it's not understandable. So then you can understand it. But then if you don't attempt it, then you're not describing the aliens properly. So a lot of times it's an extension of humanity. It's a stand-in for humanity. Just look at when Twilight Zone was done. Rod Serling wrote things, and he could talk about racism and a lot of issues that were a no-go for television at the time. But if you put an alien in that position, that's okay. So that was put in, and one of the best ones, or one of the great ones from there. It's basically a whole story based on the last tagline. It's a cookbook, and I'll leave that. I won't say which one it is, but I think a lot of people will know. But it's like written as a tagline with aliens. So you've got you've got this whole trying to think of the right words here, but it's like a whole world of aliens, from very simple to very complex, and everything in between. So, but as I said yesterday, the quote from the Who Goes There introduction is, science fiction is fun, and that's all you need to know and enjoy science fiction. But sometimes, like for someone like me, a lot of times I like to know where things come from, and I like to see where it fits in other places. And if you've listened this far and watched this far, I think you're that type of person as well. So I'll see you next time, and happy reading. Keep watching the skies.